British impressment of U.S. sailors. This was the practice of forcibly recruiting sailors from American merchant ships to serve in the Royal Navy. The process involved British naval officers boarding American ships to seize men whom they considered dissenters, or in other words, British subjects. The British practiced this due to the lack of personnel during the Napoleonic Wars during the early 1800s, since most would abandon their duties and find work with American ships due to the harsh conditions of the war, or just not wanting to participate in the war. This practice enraged Americans because the practice often involved forced removal of innocent American citizens and was a violation of national sovereignty and their individual rights. This was a major source of tension between the British and the Americans and can be described as one of the major catalysts of the War of 1812.
Interference with American trade was a major cause of the War of 1812. During the early 1800s, both Britain and France were at war with each other, and each tried to block the United States from trading with the other side. Britain especially angered Americans by using its powerful navy to stop American ships, seize their cargo, and even force American sailors into the British Army. This was called impressments. These actions violated the United States' rights as a neutral nation and hurt its economy as American merchants lost money and goods. To add to the disaster, Britain passed trade restrictions called Order in Council, which required American ships to first stop at British ports before trading with other nations. This did not just slow down the pace of commerce, but also made American traders vulnerable to attack and capture. Many Americans saw this interference as an insult to their national honor, which ended up calling for war against Great Britain to defend their trade and sovereignty.
British support of Native American resistance was a key cause of the War of 1812 since it allowed for tensions to rise between the U.S. and Britain. The ways that British supported them were by supplying groups that resisted westward expansion with weapons and ammunition. This allowed for stronger resistance against the American expansion into the Ohio Valley Territory. Britain hoped this alliance would create a protected zone for the Canadian territories that British had left. The U.S. saw this action as a threat to U.S. sovereignty, and this led many Western settlers and war hawks in Congress to argue that Britain was endangering U.S. independence and security by supporting these native attacks on westward expansion. Therefore, they argued that war should be declared to secure the frontier for expansion and to also remove British influence from the U.S.
Another cause of the war was the conquest of Canada. Canada was a British colony during the War of 1812 and sided with the British to fight against the Americans. The colonists successfully defended their territory against American invasions. The U.S. Army invaded because there was a desire for territorial expansion, with Canada being thought of as an easy region to conquer due to its small population, and Jefferson underestimated the power of the Canadian and British forces. However, the invasions failed, and Canada was not conquered due to the lack of preparation on the side of the American forces. The Canadians also had help from alliances with the indigenous people like the Shawnee Confederacy. Thomas Jefferson wanted to conquer the territory to reduce British influence and force Britain to grant concessions on issues like impressment of American sailors, which is the British practice of forcibly enlisting American sailors into the British Navy. He also wanted concessions on trade restrictions like French and British blockades, which hurt the American economy.
American desire to expand westward. During this time, a lot of Americans wanted more land for farming and settlement, especially in the Northwest Territory, which included states like Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, and Michigan. The population was growing quickly, and people saw new land as an opportunity for freedom and independence. But there was a problem. Native American tribes were already living in those areas and resisted losing their land. Many Americans believed that the British, who still controlled Canada, were helping these tribes by giving them weapons and supplies. This made Americans really angry because it seemed like Britain was standing in the way of their country's expansion even after the Revolutionary War. In Congress, a group known as the War Hawks, which included people like Henry Clay and John C. Calhoun, started pushing for war. They believed that fighting Britain would stop Native resistance and open up more land for American settlers. Some even thought that if the U.S. went to war, it might be possible to take over Canada and remove British influence from North America altogether. So, the desire for Western expansion wasn't just about land, it was about opportunity and the belief that the United States was meant to keep expanding. The War of 1812 is occasionally referred to as the Second War of Independence because of how it was fought to settle unfinished business between the British and newborn America. Supporters of the war, called war hawks, argued that war was the only way to uphold American dignity and global respect. Great Britain restricted U.S. international trade and forcibly recruited American soldiers to the Royal Navy, a practice known as impressment, which was seen as a mockery of U.S. independence. Further, Americans on the western frontier believed that the British were stirring up conflict with indigenous peoples and resented British occupation of U.S.-claimed lands. Lawyer and former United States Secretary of State Henry Clay argued that America had no choice but to resort to force as to avoid shame and indelible disgrace. Overall, actions taken by Great Britain were seen as a great disrespect to American sovereignty, hence why they had to react with a great show of strength like war.
After the American Revolution between the United States and Great Britain, the victorious colonials were left without a government or form of leadership. Influenced by the Enlightenment, they quickly formed a new form of government with multiple branches. One of these branches included the first president of the United States, George Washington. At the same time, France, an American ally, reached out to the government asking for aid in their own revolution. However, advised by Alexander Hamilton, Washington decided to draft a statement of neutrality. This article set forth ideals that would prevent future presidents from getting involved in foreign affairs, wars, and alliances. Nonetheless, President James Madison decided to engage in war with Great Britain in 1812, despite the statement of neutrality from George Washington. This brought about unrest in American citizens as many were uninterested in starting another war with the British. Regardless, the people of this new nation were forced to come together to defend their homeland and territory.
Your daddy was home when you left. Your mama was home when you left. Your sister was home when you left. Your brother